The Threxian Peacekeeping Armada exited warp at the exact edge of Sol's heliopause, with the practiced arrogance of a species that had never once been made to regret its own confidence. 50 dreadnoughts unfolded out of the tearing violet scar in space like teeth emerging from a closing jaw, each one a kilometer and a half of black chitin-plated hull, bristling with particle lances and studded with the glowing amber running lights that Threxian shipwrights insisted were aesthetically intimidating. They were right. To the 11 other species who had met this fleet before submission, the amber lights were the last thing they saw before their governments signed away their sovereignty. At the center of the formation, twice the size of any vessel around it, floated the flagship voice of inevitability, and aboard it, on a bridge lit the deep red of dried blood, Fleet Marshal Korveth Dral stood with 4 of his 6 arms clasped behind his carapace, and watched the blue-white marble of Earth swim into magnified focus on the primary view screen. "Position confirmed, Marshal," said his tactical officer, a younger Threxian named Isik Vor, mandibles clicking with the crisp cadence of someone who wanted very badly to be noticed for competence. 50 of 50 vessels present, formation Kestanal achieved. Local system defenses register. As he paused, checked the reading twice, then continued with poorly hidden amusement, negligible. Orbital platforms, some form of automated debris interceptors. Nothing rated above point defense grade. As the survey drones reported, Korveth Dral did not blink because Threxians did not have eyelids, but he had perfected an equivalent gesture of contempt involving a slow roll of all 4 secondary eyes. 3 centuries of expansion, Vor, and do you know what I have learned about primitive species? Tell me, Marshal. They always believe their planet is special, every single one. The Krill thought their moons were sacred, the Asuvai thought their gods would strike us down, the Menrathi thought their little energy shield grid made them untouchable, and it stopped exactly nothing. He allowed himself something that in a human would have been called a smile if a human smile involved 4 rows of serrated teeth designed to strip meat from bone. Humans will believe their solar system is special too, right up until they don't. Should I open a channel, Marshal? Open it to every frequency they've got. Radio, lasercom, whatever crude method they think is secure. I want every human who has ever built a receiver to hear this. The channel opened. On Earth, in 600 languages simultaneously, in bunkers and command centers and orbital stations, and the tablets of curious civilians who had illegally patched into military feeds, a voice like grinding gravel filled the air. "People of Sol," Korveth Dral began, savoring the words, "I am Fleet Marshal Korveth Dral of the Threxian Conquered, commanding the Peacekeeping Armada under the authority of the Interstellar Compact. You have been observed, catalogued, and assessed. Your technology is centuries behind galactic standard. Your defenses are, and I use this term generously, decorative. Your colonies at Mars, at the Jovian moons, at your fledgling outpost in the Alpha Centauri system, represent an unlawful expansion into space you have neither the strength nor the standing to hold." He let that settle the way he always did, giving the primitives time to feel the cold water close over their heads. "You have 1 galactic rotation, your equivalent of approximately 11 hours, to transmit unconditional surrender of your colonial holdings and full submission of your homeworld to conquered administration. In exchange, your species will be permitted to exist as a protected client world, contributing labor and resources according to conquered need. Resist, and this armada will reduce your capital cities to glass, your fleet to debris, and your species to a cautionary tale told to the next primitives we find. I have done this 11 times, humans. It has never once gone differently. Do not flatter yourselves into believing you will be the exception." He closed the channel with a flick of one lower hand, satisfied, and turned to his bridge crew. "Bring long-range sensors to full active scan. I want a complete map of every ship, station, and rock with an engine on it before that deadline expires. And somebody find out why their home broadcasts are still calling us an unidentified fleet instead of terrifying, all-powerful conquerors. Work on their manners." A ripple of dry, clicking laughter moved through the bridge. Korveth Dral let it run its course because morale mattered, and because he genuinely believed down in the marrow of his exoskeleton that there was nothing left to learn about conquering primitive worlds. He had done it on Krill, where the natives had barricaded themselves in ancient stone temples and prayed to gods who never answer. He had done it on the ice world of Menrathi, whose energy shield grid had held for exactly 4 minutes against the Armada's opening barrage before the capital burned. He had done it 9 other times besides, against species who fought with everything from crude fission missiles to biological weapons that had admittedly cost him 2 ships and 40 crew on one particularly unpleasant campaign a century back. But never once had a species done anything but eventually, inevitably, kneel. Marshal, said Isik Vor, still watching his scanner readouts with the diligence of a young officer determined to be noticed. Long-range sensors are picking up considerable orbital infrastructure around the third planet. Habitats, shipyards, what appears to be significant industrial capacity in the asteroid belt as well. Their economy is more developed than the initial survey suggested. Industry without a fleet to protect it is just inventory waiting to be repossessed, Korveth Dral said. Note it for the requisition manifest. The Council will want an accurate accounting of what we're bringing home. He clasped his lower hands together, turned from the view screen, and addressed his assembled bridge officers with the easy confidence of a man who had given this exact speech, in one form or another, 11 times before. Listen well, all of you, because I want no confusion when the history of this conquest is written. Humanity will resist verbally. They may even attempt some token gesture of defense, a scrambled fighter wing, perhaps, or an obsolete orbital defense platform reactivated for the occasion. It will not matter. It has never mattered. Primitive species always believe the story of their own specialness right up until it becomes impossible to believe it any further, and by then, the matter is already settled. Prepare defensive doctrine Kestanol as a formality only. I do not expect we will need it. Understood, Marshal, said his first officer, a broad-shouldered veteran named Osinath Vral, whose loyalty to Korveth Dral ran back 3 full campaigns and who had never once seen his commander wrong about the psychology of a conquered species. Shall I ready the diplomatic corps for planetary landing procedures ahead of schedule, given your confidence? Do it, Korveth Dral said. I want the surrender paperwork drafted before their deadline even expires. Let them see how little we doubt the outcome. Fear works best when it looks like patience. 400 million kilometers away, in a bunker built into the bedrock beneath the Colorado Rockies, nobody was laughing, but nobody looked particularly afraid either, which would have unsettled Korveth Dral far more than panic. Admiral Josephine Reyes, no relation to the woman about to make Threxian naval history. A coincidence the Sol Defense Command Press Office would later have an absolute field day with, stood in front of a tactical table glowing with the Armada's 50-ship formation, and did not touch the comm panel blinking with 61 incoming calls from heads of state demanding to know the plan. They gave us 11 hours, said her chief of staff, a wiry man named Havorson who had not slept in 2 days on principle. Do we even need 11 hours? We don't need 11 minutes, Reyes said. But we're going to use every one of them because the last thing I want is for that lizard marshal to think we panicked into this. Get me a secure line to Fleet Command Prime. Tell them it's time to wake up Ozymandias. Havorson's fingers paused over the console. You're sure, once she's committed, there's no walking it back. General Havorson, do you know what we've spent the last 9 years and $4 trillion building in secret, in the dark? Behind every deception operation this planet has ever run, specifically for a day like today. Oh yes, ma'am. Then stop asking me if I'm sure and wake up my ship. Havorson moved to the console but paused with his hand above the activation key, the way a man pauses before pulling a trigger he has trained 10 years to pull and never once believed he would need to. For what it's worth, Admiral, when the Joint Chiefs greenlit the Ozymandias program, half the room thought it was a fantasy. I remember the budget hearings. Senators asking why we needed a warship the size of a small moon when nobody in the galaxy had even said hello yet. And the other half of the rooms. The other half remembered history. Every single first contact scenario ever wargamed by this planet's military strategists ended one of two ways. Either the aliens were friendly, in which case none of this mattered, or they weren't, in which case the deciding factor was never going to be diplomacy. It was going to be whether we had something in our back pocket nobody expected. He pressed the key. Somewhere in a hardened facility in geostationary orbit, alert klaxons that had never once sounded outside of drills began, quietly and without fanfare, to sound. Ozymandias protocol initiated. God help that fleet. Reyes watched the tactical table, where the Threxian formation sat immobile at the edge of the system, patient in the way only a species with 3 centuries of unbroken success could afford to be patient. God's not going to need to get involved, Havorson. That's rather the point of the whole program. She turned to the room, to the dozen analysts and liaison officers who had spent the last 6 hours fielding panicked calls from every allied government on Earth, and raised her voice just enough to carry. I want a channel open to every head of state the moment this engagement concludes, win or lose. If we lose, they deserve to hear it from us directly and not from a Threxian broadcast. If we win, she paused, allowing herself for just a moment something almost like a smile, then they deserve to hear that from us too, and I intend to enjoy delivering that particular message. And if it's somewhere in between, asked a young analyst near the back of the room, a woman named Priya Anand who had spent the last 3 years modeling probability curves for exactly this scenario and had never once produced a result she found comforting. Partial success, mutual losses, that kind of thing. There is no in-between in the simulations, Ms. Anand, Reyes said. I've read every one of them. Marcus Cole ran the tactical projections himself, 11 full scenarios against this exact fleet composition, and every single one ends with the Ozymandias fully operational and the enemy fleet neutralized. I don't put much stock in perfect numbers, as a rule. In 30 years of service, I've learned the universe loves nothing more than punishing certainty. But I've also read the shield telemetry from the drydock stress tests, and I've watched that ship take a sustained particle barrage from 3 armed orbital platforms simultaneously without so much as flickering. And if there's one thing I believe in this room right now, it's that ship. She looked back at the tactical display, at the golden icon that had not yet appeared but soon would. Get me a line to Captain Reyes. I want to talk to her before she goes in. 6 hours later, with the Threxian deadline ticking down and Earth's surface cities calm with the particular eerie calm of a species that has decided, collectively and without much discussion, to trust its government exactly this once, a presence appeared in the dark beyond Neptune's orbit that no sensor net in Sol space had been designed to miss, because no sensor net in Sol space had ever needed to track something that large. The UNS Ozymandias was 2.1 kilometers of hull, built in a shipyard that did not appear on any public registry, assembled by workers who had signed non-disclosure agreements enforceable by treason law, and armed with technology that had been developed from a single absurdly lucky breakthrough in graviton lattice physics that the science division still privately called the miracle. She did not look like a Threxian dreadnought. She did not look like anything that had ever flown before. Her hull was smooth, matte, and nearly featureless except for the seams of her weapon batteries and the enormous glowing blue latticework that pulsed just beneath her outer plating like something alive. On her bridge, Captain Diana Reyes, 38 years old, veteran of the Belt conflicts, and as of 9 years ago, the only person Fleet Command trusted enough to hand an entire species gamble to, sat in the command chair with her hands folded and watched the countdown timer on the Threxian ultimatum tick past the 4-hour mark. Talk to me, Nadia, she said. Her XO, Commander Nadia Osai, did not look up from her console. Warp drive spun up and holding steady, full charge in 90 seconds. Shield lattice at 100%, and Captain, I want it on record that 100% for us is not the same number it is for anyone else in this system. Noted for the record, tactical. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Cole, the ship's tactical officer, cracked his knuckles in a habit that drove Ray's half-mad on quiet days and comforted her on days like this one. 98 primary emitter arrays charged and ready, all 42 Graviton Lance turrets calibrated to the enemy hull composition we pulled from the survey drone data. I've run the simulation 11 times, Captain. Every single one ends the same way. And how does it end? Cole allowed himself the ghost of a grin, badly for them. Ray stood, straightened her uniform jacket, and looked around at her bridge crew, people she had trained personally, people who had spent 9 years believing in a ship that officially did not exist, for a mission that until 6 hours ago had only ever been a simulation. Everyone at their post, everyone breathing. This isn't the day we die for our species, people. This is the day we make sure nobody ever gets to try that math again. She sat back down. Helm, take us to the jump point. Nadia, spin the warp drive to full. Marcus, when we drop out of that jump, I want firing solutions on all 50 targets live and ready before the aliens even finish blinking, assuming they blink. Do they blink? Video's inconclusive, Captain, Cole said. I'll let you know. Well, do that, punch it. The Ozymandias did not so much accelerate as fold the intervening distance out of existence. Space in front of her bow tore open in a lance of white gold light, utterly unlike the violet warp signature of Threxian engines. And in less than 4 seconds, the largest human vessel ever constructed dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly into the geometric center of the Threxian Peacekeeping Armada's formation. On the Voice of Inevitability's bridge, alarms Korveth Dral had never personally heard triggered simultaneously across 11 different systems. Report, he snapped, all 4 secondary eyes swinging toward the tactical display, where a single golden icon had appeared exactly where no golden icon should have been able to appear, radiating a mass and energy signature that made Ensign Isik Vor's console flash a warning color the conquered navy reserved for stellar phenomena, not ships. Marshal Vor's mandibles clicked rapidly, an unconscious tell of pure shock. There is a vessel inside our formation. It did not translate in from the heliopause boundary. It did not use a detectable warp corridor. It simply arrived. Mass estimate is Marshal. The mass estimate alone is larger than our entire flagship. That's not possible. Run it again. I have run it 4 times, Marshal. The reading holds. Korveth Dral crossed his bridge in 3 long strides and stared at the view screen, where the visual feed was resolving in real time. And for the first time in 3 centuries of a very successful conquest career, Fleet Marshal Korveth Dral felt something in his chitin go cold. The ship hanging in the dead center of his 50-vessel formation was not decorated with menace. It did not need to be. It was simply, overwhelmingly, impossibly large. Its hull a seamless dark expanse threaded with veins of pulsing blue-white light. And it had appeared inside a formation specifically designed so that nothing could appear inside it without being torn apart by the crossfire of 50 separate point-defense grids. Nothing was firing. Nobody had given the order. Every gunnery officer on every one of the 50 Threxian ships was, in this exact moment, staring at their targeting displays with the particular paralysis of soldiers who had just realized their weapons might be a joke. Marshal, Vor said, voice tight, they are opening a channel. Put it through, Korveth Dral said, because pride was a difficult thing to set down even when instinct screamed that he should, and because 300 years of easy victories had taught him that showing hesitation in front of his own bridge crew was worse than any risk the unknown vessel could pose. And Vor, get every ship in the formation targeting solutions on that thing. All of them. Now. As I marshaled, the channel connected. On the Ozymandias' bridge, Captain Diana Reyes leaned back in her chair, crossed one leg over the other with the unhurried calm of someone settling in to watch a show she already knew the ending to, and smiled at the alien face that resolved on her view screen, gray-green, chitinous, 4 small secondary eyes flanking 2 large primary ones, mandibles working with barely restrained hostility. Fleet Marshal Korveth Dral, I presume, she said. Captain Diana Ray's UNS Ozymandias, I caught your broadcast from earlier. 11 hours, wasn't it? Very generous of you. Korveth Dral's mandibles clicked once, sharp. You will identify your vessel's designation and withdraw immediately from the center of my formation, human, or I will treat your presence here as an act of war and destroy you where you sit. See, that's the thing, Reyes said, folding her hands in her lap. I did identify her, UNS Ozymandias, and as for withdrawing, she glanced sideways at Cole, who gave her a small nod. We're actually pretty comfortable right here. Great view, 50 ships all around us. Very cozy. You mistake my patience for weakness. You are surrounded by an armada that has conquered 11 civilizations, human. Your single vessel, regardless of its unusual size, will not survive the opening volley of a single one of my dreadnoughts, let alone all 50. You keep saying 11 like it's an impressive number, Reyes said. It's not actually. It's the number of times you've picked a fight with someone smaller than you. Doesn't tell me anything about what happens the first time you don't get to pick. Every fight is a fight I choose, human. That is the nature of an armada. We do not stumble into wars, we select them. Sure, and you selected this one based on a survey drone report that clocked our point defense grid and our orbital debris in interceptors and decided that was the whole picture. That's not selecting a fight, Marshal, that's grading a test you never finished reading. You looked at our homework and skipped straight to the back of the book for the answer key, except the answer key was for a completely different species. Reyes gestured, and though the Threxians on the other end of the channel couldn't see the motion, Cole caught it and allowed himself a small, private grin. I'd ask what your survey drones actually recorded about deep system industrial output, but something tells me they never got that close. We're funny about privacy out past the asteroid belt. Korveth Dral's mandibles clicked. A habitual tick that Vor had learned over 6 years of service meant his marshal was recalculating faster than he wanted to admit. You speak as though a single vessel changes the calculus of 50 dreadnoughts, Captain. Even granting your ship an unusual scale, unusual shielding, whatever advantage you believe you carry, simple mathematics favors the fleet. It always has. It is why fleets exist. Fleets exist because most weapons scale the way you'd expect them to, Reyes said. More guns, more damage, more ships, more guns, it's a good rule. It's worked for you 11 times. I'm not here to tell you the rule is wrong in general, Marshal. I'm here to tell you it's wrong today against this ship. And there's a difference between those two statements that I genuinely think matters to how the rest of your species survives the next century. You built an entire military doctrine on the assumption that scale always wins. We built one ship on the assumption that sometimes it doesn't have to. Pretty words. I have heard pretty words from client species commanders before, in the moments before their fleets burned. I believe you, Reyes said, and there was no mockery in it now, only a kind of level, almost weary honesty. I believe every one of those commanders meant it too, right up until it stopped being true. That's the thing about being the biggest fish in the pond for 300 years, Marshal. You stop checking the size of the pond. You just assume it's the same pond it's always been. I'd like you to consider, just for the length of this conversation, the possibility that today the pond got bigger than you were prepared for. And that possibility costs you nothing to entertain except a little bit of pride you can well afford to spend. You ask a great deal of a stranger's pride. I'm asking you to spend it instead of your crew's lives, Reyes said. That's a pretty fair trade, all things considered. For the first time in his career, Korveth Dral found himself without an immediate reply. He recovered quickly, falling back on the script that had worked a dozen times before, because the alternative, improvising against an unknown, was not a muscle he had ever needed to exercise. You have exactly one opportunity to withdraw your vessel and transmit terms of surrender on behalf of your species. Refuse, and I will order this entire armada to open fire on your ship in the next 60 seconds. 60 seconds, Reyes repeated, and checked an imaginary watch on her wrist. a gesture that translated across no known Threxian body language but which her crew found so perfectly, savagely funny that Nadia Os had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing on an open channel. Marshal, I want to be straight with you because I think you've earned honesty today even if you haven't earned much else. My ship's shields have never been tested against a real opponent. Not once. We built her in secret, we trained on her in secret, and until about 4 minutes ago the most exciting thing that had ever happened to this crew was a coolant leak on Deck 12. You are genuinely about to be the very first thing that has ever shot at us for real. Then you understand the outcome, Korveth Dral said, feeling his confidence climb back to its familiar altitude. I understand the outcome, Reyes agreed. I just don't think it's the one you're picturing. See, we didn't build this ship to survive a fight with you, Marshal. We built her to make sure a fight with you was never a fair one in the first place. There's a difference between a species that's ready to defend itself and a species that's spent 9 years quietly building something specifically so that arrogant men in glowing amber armor never get to give an ultimatum like yours and mean it. You're standing at the edge of the first mistake your Concord's ever going to make, and I genuinely, sincerely do not think you understand that yet. So go ahead, take your 60 seconds, open fire. I promise you every gunner on your bridge is about to learn something about their own weapons that none of your previous 11 conquests ever taught them. Korveth Dral's mandibles clicked, low and dangerous. You talk a great deal for a species with one ship, Captain Reyes. Funny, Reyes said, one ship's exactly what I was thinking about you too. 50 of yours, one of mine. Strange how that math's about to work out. Fire, Korveth Dral said. The Threxian Peacekeeping Armada did not fire a warning shot. It fired everything. 50 dreadnoughts, arranged in the tight Kestanol formation designed to maximize overlapping fields of fire, unleashed a coordinated barrage that would have vaporized a Menrathi capital ship in under 2 seconds, and had, in fact, done exactly that during the Menrathi conquest. Particle lances, plasma cannon volleys, and swarms of self-guided kinetic drones converged from every direction on the single golden shape sitting in their formation's dead center. A hemisphere of raw destructive energy collapsing inward with the ferocity of 50 proud navies determined to erase the insult of their own surprise. On the Voice of Inevitability's bridge, Ensign Isik Vor watched the tactical display with mandibles clenched, waiting for the golden icon to disappear in a cascade of debris and confirm every instinct in his body that the universe still made sense. The golden icon did not disappear. Instead, a faint blue-white shimmer bloomed across the Ozymandias' hull, a lattice of light that brightened, absorbed, and simply held. 50 ships' worth of weapons fire broke against that shimmer like ocean waves against a cliff face that had never once considered the possibility of erosion. Energy that should have vaporized city blocks scattered harmlessly across the shield geometry and dispersed into space as heat bloom. And for 3 full seconds, the entire Threxian Armada kept firing everything it had, because none of the gunnery officers could quite convince themselves of what their own sensors were telling them. Cease fire, Korveth Dral said, and had to say it twice because his own voice did not want to obey him the first time. Cease fire, report damage to enemy vessel. Marshal Vor said, and his voice had gone very quiet, there is no damage. Shield integrity on the enemy vessel reads at Marshal, it reads at 99.97%. It has not dropped meaningfully at all. On the Ozymandias' bridge, the shockwave of 50 ships' combined firepower rattled through the hull as a distant hum, nothing more, and Nadia Os let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Shields holding at 99.97%, Captain, barely even warm. Well, Diana Reyes said into the open channel, and there was no triumph in her voice, which somehow made it worse for the Threxians listening than triumph would have been. There was only calm, patient, almost gentle certainty. That's your 60 seconds, Marshal. How'd it feel? Silence answered her for a long moment. When Korveth Dral's voice returned, some of the gravel-grinding confidence had gone out of it, replaced by something tighter, more careful. You will not survive our next volley. I don't think that's true, Reyes said, but I appreciate the consistency. Look, Marshal, I'm going to level with you one more time because I actually don't enjoy this part as much as maybe I should. My tactical officer has run this exact scenario, this exact fleet composition against our capabilities 11 separate times in simulation. 11 for 11 since you like that number. You want to guess how many of those simulations end with your armada operational afterward? Cole, at his console, held up a single finger without looking up from his readouts. 0, Reyes said. It's 0, Marshal, so here's what's going to happen next. I'm not going to destroy your ships. I want to be very clear about that on the record for whatever this transmission is worth to Conquered Command later. We are going to disable every single vessel in your formation methodically without killing your crews if we can help it, because that's not actually the kind of species we are, no matter what you assumed about us 6 hours ago. And when we're done, you're going to fly your 50 crippled ships home, and you're going to tell your compact that Sol system is closed for conquest. Effective immediately. Permanently. You overestimate yourself, Korveth Dral said, though the words came out with considerably less conviction than his opening broadcast had carried. Signal all vessels. Break formation, spread to attack pattern Vosternal, target their engine section and weapon emitters directly, all batteries independent fire. The Threxian formation broke apart into a wider spread. 50 dreadnoughts peeling outward in a maneuver designed to encircle the Ozymandias from every angle at once and deny her the ability to concentrate return fire on any single attacker. It was, by any conventional standard of naval doctrine, a reasonable tactical response to an unknown threat. Across the scattering formation, individual ship commanders barked orders into their own local channels, none of them yet fully aware that every human sensor operator aboard the Ozymandias was quietly listening to all of it, translating in real time through a linguistics algorithm that had been fed 3 centuries of intercepted conquered communications by intelligence assets neither the Threxians nor, frankly, most of Earth's own governments had ever known existed. This is Kestanal's Fury. We are breaking to attack Vector 7, targeting enemy engine section, all batteries free, came one voice, clipped and professional. Ashfall's judgment acknowledges, moving to Vector 11, requesting confirmation on shield frequency modulation before we began another. Cut short by a burst of Marshal-issued static ordering all ships to stop requesting confirmations and simply fire. Belay that, Korveth Dral snapped across the fleet-wide channel, his composure fraying at the edges for the first time in living memory of anyone aboard the Voice of Inevitability. Every vessel, independent targeting, maximum output, converge fire on any exposed section of the enemy hull. I want that ship's shields down before it completes a single offensive pass. Marcus Cole watched the scattering formation happen on his display, with something close to professional appreciation. They're not stupid, he said. Vosternal spread, full independent targeting, they're trying to force us to divide our fire across 50 separate angles simultaneously. Whoever's running their tactical department knows their business. Good, Reyes said. I'd rather beat a fleet that's trying than one that's panicking. Panicking fleets do unpredictable things. Marcus, talk to me, what have we got? 42 Graviton Lance turrets, full independent targeting authority, and Captain, I want to remind everyone that we've never actually fired these at a real target. He grinned despite himself. Which is either terrifying or the best part of my week, I genuinely can't decide. Let's find out together. Osai, keep the shields at full lattice integrity, rotating priority to whatever quadrant's taking the heaviest fire. Marcus, target the outermost ring first, work inward. I don't want any of them slipping past us and running for Earth while we're focused center mass. I, Captain, locking 42 targets. Cole's hands moved across his console with the fluid precision of 9 years of drilling for a scenario he'd genuinely never expected to run for real. Firing solutions confirmed. Graviton Lances online, ready on your mark. Mark. The Ozymandias opened fire, and for the first time in the history of galactic warfare, a species other than the Threxian conquered demonstrated what it looked like when overwhelming force met a target that simply refused to be overwhelmed. The Graviton Lances did not look like conventional weapons fire. There was no visible beam, no dramatic flash of destructive light. Instead, 42 separate points on the Ozymandias' hull shimmered with a distortion in the fabric of space itself, and 42 Threxian dreadnoughts across the outer ring of the formation simply lurched, their engine sections crushed by localized gravity wells strong enough to buckle reinforced hull plating like foil, their weapon emitters warped into useless slag, all without a single hull breach, without a single explosive decompression, without a single life sign extinguished. Marshal, Vor's voice cracked with something between horror and awe as damage reports flooded his console. We are losing propulsion across the outer ring, 7 no 12 vessels reporting complete engine failure, weapon systems on 4 more vessels reading total functional loss. He stopped, staring at the display as though it might change if he looked at it hard enough. Marshal, none of these vessels report hull breach or casualties. Their systems are being disabled, precisely, individually. That is not possible, Korveth Dral said, but he said it the way a person says something they no longer believe out of habit rather than conviction. No weapon system produces that effect. Conquered physics does not permit. Marshal, Vor said, 16 vessels are now confirmed disabled. On the Ozymandias' bridge, Diana Reyes watched the tactical display update in real time. 16 red icons flickering to a neutral gray that indicated combat ineffectiveness rather than destruction, and allowed herself a small, tight nod. Talk to me, Nadia, shield status. 99.4%, Captain. We're taking return fire from the remaining 34 vessels, but it's scattershot now. They're not coordinating anymore, they're just throwing everything they've got and hoping something sticks. That's what happens to a fleet when its formation gets taken apart in 90 seconds, Reyes said. Marcus, second ring, same pattern, work inward. And somebody open the channel back up, I want the Marshal to hear this part specifically. The channel opens, captains. Marshal Korveth Dral, Reyes said, her voice carrying across every remaining Threxian bridge in the Armada translat. Ed automatically by systems that had been listening in on conquered frequencies with rather more attention than the conquered had ever suspected. I want you to notice something. 16 of your ships, 90 seconds, 0 casualties on either side. I told you we weren't here to kill your people, and I meant it. I need you to actually hear that because it matters for what happens after today. But I also need you to understand that not here to kill your people, and not going to stop until every single one of your 50 ships is sitting dead in space, are 2 completely different sentences, and I intend to make good on both of them. You will not, Korveth Dral started and stopped himself because the sentence he'd been about to finish, you will not survive this, had already been proven false in the most humiliating way available to a fleet commander live on an open channel in front of his entire remaining armada. He tried again. What do you want, human? Right now, Reyes said, I want you to order your remaining 34 ships to stand down, cease fire, power down weapon systems, and let this end without me having to disable another single vessel. That's the offer. It's a good one. I'd take it if I were you. I cannot order surrender, Korveth Dral said, and something in his voice had shifted from pure arrogance into something rower, more desperate. The sound of a career built on easy victories colliding for the first time with a wall it could not climb. The conquered does not forgive commanders who surrender to a client-tier species. My crews would be executed for the disgrace upon our return. I would rather. You'd rather what, Marshal? Die out here. Take your crew down with you over a point of pride that a fleet of, 300 years of unearned confidence built for you. Rey's voice softened, just slightly, not out of sympathy exactly, but out of the particular patience of someone who had spent 9 years training for a fight she'd hoped she'd never actually have to have. Here's a thought. What if I make the decision easier for you? What if I take the choice of surrender or die completely off the table and just disable every ship in your fleet whether you order it or not? Then nobody executes you for cowardice because you never actually surrendered. You just lost. Cleanly, nobody's fault but physics. Korveth Dral's mandibles worked silently for a long moment. On his bridge, Ensign Isik Vor watched his marshal, a man he had served under for 6 years, a man he had genuinely believed to be the single most dangerous commander in the conquered navy, stand very still, all four secondary eyes fixed on the view screen, and say nothing at all. Marcus, Reyes said quietly off the open channel, continue the second ring. The battle that followed would be studied, replayed, and taught in naval academies across at least 4 species worth of military colleges for the next century, and every single analysis would eventually arrive at the same conclusion. It was not a battle so much as a demonstration, delivered with a precision that bordered on cruelty, except that the cruelty never actually materialized because nobody died. The Ozymandias moved through the remaining Threxian formation, not like a predator stalking prey, but like a surgeon working through a list. And Marcus Cole called out each engagement with the clipped, focused cadence of a man discovering, in real time, that 9 years of theoretical drilling had produced a weapons system that worked exactly as promised. Second ring, 12 vessels engaging, he said, and the graviton lances flared again, distortions rippling out across another arc of the Threxian formation. Engine sections crumpled. Weapon batteries seized mid-cycle, capacitors overloading into harmless heat dumps instead of the intended discharge. Shield generators across a dozen Threxian hulls flickered and failed as the localized gravity distortions disrupted their power conduits without ever touching the hull plating directly. A 12 confirmed disabled, 0 casualties, Captain. 28 down, Reyes said, watching the tactical display. 22 to go, Nadia, how are the shields holding? 98.9%, Osai said. Captain, I have to say, at this rate we could probably keep doing this for another 11 hours and not notice the difference. Let's not test that theory for fun, Marcus, third wave. The remaining 22 Threxian vessels, no longer operating under any coherent tactical doctrine, scattered in a dozen different directions, some attempting to flee toward the outer system, some still doggedly firing everything they had left, a few simply drifting, their crews too stunned by the collapse of their entire strategic paradigm to do much of anything at all. The Ozymandias pursued none of them dramatically. She did not chase. She simply rotated her formidable array of weapon emitters with the calm, unhurried efficiency of a Machin. That had never once needed to hurry, and one by one, in clusters of 3 and 4 and 7, the remaining ships of the Threxian Peacekeeping Armada went dark. Aboard the Castanal's Fury, the commander who had opened the engagement with such crisp professionalism found himself shouting increasingly desperate orders into a comm system that no longer had anything left to transmit to. His weapons batteries reduced to inert slag, his engines a graveyard of crushed alloy, and his crew standing at their stations with nothing to do but watch the golden shape on their viewscreen calmly, methodically move on to the next target without so much as acknowledging their existence. Aboard the Ashfall's Judgment, the cautious officer who had asked about shield frequency modulation got his answer the hard way, not through calculation, but through the simple, brutal experience of watching his own shield generator seize and die under a distortion field his sensors couldn't even properly categorize. The readouts flickering between error states that conquered engineering manuals had no names for because no conquered engineer had ever needed one. And aboard a dozen other hulks scattered now across a swath of space the size of a small moon's orbit, dozens of Threxian sailors who had spent their careers believing themselves the inheritors of the galaxy's most feared navy sat in the sudden, ringing silence of dead systems and powerless weapons, and slowly, ship by ship, began to understand that something fundamental about their place in the universe had just been quietly, permanently rewritten. Fourth wave, Cole called out, voice still clipped and professional even as something like awe crept in around the edges of it. 9 vessels remaining active, converging on our position from the trailing edge of the formation. They're trying a pincer, Captain. Looks like somebody over there still believes coordinated fire might change the outcome. Let them try, Reyes said. Osai, reroute another 2% of shield capacity to the aft quadrant just in case somebody gets creative. Marcus, take the pincer apart. The 9 remaining active Threxian vessels closed from 2 directions in a maneuver that, against any other target in galactic history, would have represented a genuinely dangerous tactical gambit. Converging fire from opposing vectors, timed to the half-second, designed to saturate a single shield facing faster than it could be reinforced from elsewhere on the hull. Against the Ozymandias, it produced the same result as every attack that had come before it. A shimmer of blue-white light, a brief spike in ambient heat bloom, and within 90 seconds, 9 more gray icons added to the tally. Aboard one of the fleeing dreadnoughts, the Ashfall's Judgment, a young Threxian gunnery officer named Keithra Voss, no relation to anyone the humans would ever meet, though the coincidence of names across 2 species would become a minor point of trivia in later historical accounts, watched her own weapon systems power down without her having touched a single control, and turned to her commanding officer with 4 eyes wide in an expression that needed no translation. "Commander," she said, "our reactor just went to standby on its own." "I know," said her commander, a grizzled veteran named Torvik Sen who had served in 6 separate conquest campaigns and had never once in 30 years of service encountered an enemy who could reach across open space and simply switch off his ship's weapons like flipping a light. "Brace for impact, Voss. There won't be one, that's the strange part. There won't be one at all." He was right. The Ashfall's Judgment drifted, weaponless, engineless except for maneuvering thrusters, its crew intact, its hull unmarked, added to the growing tally of gray icons on the Ozymandias' tactical display. 39, Cole said, 41, 44. He glanced up at Reyes, something almost giddy breaking through his professional composure. "Captain, we are 11 minutes into this engagement." "I know," Reyes said, "keep goings." By the time the tactical display read 48 disabled, the Threxian Peacekeeping Armada existed, functionally, as a scattered field of dead-in-space hulks and exactly 2 remaining active vessels. A mid-formation cruiser making a last, desperate, almost admirable attempt to put itself between the Ozymandias and the flagship, and the voice of inevitability itself, where Fleet Marshal Korveth Dral stood on a bridge gone entirely silent except for the low hum of failing systems and the soft mechanical voice of a damage control officer reading out a casualty report that against every expectation his 300-year career had built in him, contained no casualties at all. Marshal Isikvor said very quietly, "The Kestanal's fury has just gone dark. That leaves only ourselves and the Ashkari's wrath still operational." "I can see that, Ensign," Korveth Dral said. He had not moved his position in front of the view screen in the better part of 20 minutes, and something in his bearing had changed. Not fear exactly, or not only fear, but the particular hollowness of a man watching his understanding of the universe get systematically dismantled in real time by a species he had, 6 hours earlier, described as decorative. "Orders, Marshal." Korveth Dral was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Open the channel." It connected instantly, as though Diana Reyes had been waiting for exactly this moment, which in fact she had. "Marshal," she said, "you've got 2 ships left. One of them's yours." "I see that," Korveth Dral said. His voice had lost almost all of its earlier gravel-grinding menace. What remained was something quieter, more careful, the voice of a man choosing his words with the precision of someone who understood finally and completely that he was not speaking from a position of power anymore and perhaps never had been. "You could have destroyed my entire armada in the first 90 seconds, Captain Reyes. Your weapons demonstrated that capability clearly enough." Why have you spent 20 minutes disabling us one section at a time instead? Reyes considered the question, and when she answered, there was no triumph in it, no gloating, only the same steady patience she had carried through the entire engagement. Because there's a difference between winning a fight and making a point, Marshal, and today I needed to make a point, not just to you, but to every ship in your fleet, every crew member watching their own systems go dark without a scratch on their hull, every single one of your species who's going to hear about this by the time you limp home. I wanted every person in this armada to understand, personally, individually, in a way that no broadcast or intelligence report could ever capture, exactly how far outside your league you found yourselves the moment you crossed into this system. Destroying you would have been fast. It also would have taught you nothing except that we're dangerous. I already knew you'd figure that part out eventually. What I needed you to understand today is that we're dangerous, and we didn't need to kill a single one of you to prove it. Korveth Dral said nothing for a long moment. Behind him, on his own bridge, Ensign Isik Vor watched his marshal absorb something that looked, for the first time in 6 years of service together, uncomfortably close to genuine humility. The Ashkari's wrath, Korveth Dral said finally. Last one, Reyes agreed. After that, it's just you, Marshal. And I'll be honest, I'd rather you stood down than made me disable my 50th ship of the day. Not because I couldn't, because I think you've got a decision to make that matters more than whether we finish this the hard way or the easy way, and I'd like you to make it while you're still flying. What decision is that? Whether you go home and tell you're conquered the truth, Reyes said, or whether you go home and let them keep believing what they believed 6 hours ago. Because, Marshal, I promise you, the next fleet that comes here believing what you believed is going to have a much worse day than you did, and I don't especially want that. I'd rather this end here today with your report doing the work instead of another 50 ships. Korveth Dral looked at his tactical display, at the field of gray icons that had, 20 minutes ago, been the pride of the Threxian conquered navy, and at the single golden icon at the center of it, all that had not so much as flickered through the entire engagement. He looked at Ensign Isik Vor, whose expression had shifted somewhere in the last several minutes from shock into something more complicated. The particular vertigo of a young officer watching every assumption his career had been built on come apart in real time. Order the Ashkari's wrath to power down, he said quietly. All weapons systems immediately. Marshal Vor asked. You heard me, Ensign, signal the order. He turned back to the view screen to the calm, unhurried face of Captain Diana Reyes, and for the first time in his broadcast 6 hours earlier, when he had promised the people of Saul that resistance had never once gone differently, Korveth Dral found himself on the wrong side of his own certainty. You will have your surrender, Captain Reyes. Not because I fear your weapons, though I do, and I suspect any commander who claimed otherwise after today would be lying. I will surrender because I have led this armada into a fight I did not understand, against an enemy I fundamentally misjudged, and 3 centuries of easy conquest have apparently taught me nothing about recognizing the day that stops being true. That is a debt I owe my crews, if nothing else. They should not die for my pride. That's the most honest thing you've said since you dropped out of warp, Marshal, Reyes said. And there was something almost gentle in it now, some genuine respect crossy. NG the gulf between 2 species who had, less than half an hour earlier, been on the brink of a war that would have ended before it truly began. I'm not going to pretend today doesn't change things between your conquered and my species. It does, but how it changes them is still up to you and up to what you tell them when you get home. I'd like it to end with something better than another 50 ships showing up in a year making the same demands. I think you'd like that too. I would, Korveth Dral said, and meant it, in the particular way that only total, unambiguous defeat can make a person mean something. The formal surrender took another 40 minutes to process. Weapon systems confirmed powered down across all 50 vessels. Tow lines established by a modest fleet of human support ships that had been quietly holding position at the edge of the system the entire time, medical teams standing by in case any Threxian crew required assistance, though in the end none did. Because the Ozymandias' weapons had done exactly what Marcus Cole's 11 simulations had promised, and not a single Threxian sailor suffered so much as a bruise. Diana Reyes stayed on the bridge through the entire process, watching her crew work with the quiet, focused competence of people who had just made history and did not yet have the emotional bandwidth to fully process it. Captain Nadia Osai said quietly near the end of the process, "Admiral Reyes is requesting a channel, says it's urgent. Patch her through." The view screen flickered to show Admiral Josephine Reyes, standing in the Colorado bunker, looking at a tactical display that by now had been fed real-time telemetry from the Ozymandias for the better part of an hour, showing the same 50 gray icons and one steady golden one that every naval officer on Earth had been watching with held breath since the engagement began. "Captain Reyes," the Admiral said, and there was something thick in her voice that had nothing to do with any family resemblance between the two women, only the plain, human weight of having just watched her species survive its first real test as a spacefaring civilization. Status report. 50 Threxian vessels disabled, 0 human casualties, 0 Threxian casualties, Reyes said. Fleet Marshal Korveth Dral has formally surrendered and is preparing to return to conquered space with his fleet under tow assistance from our support vessels. I've asked him to deliver an accurate account of today's engagement to his command structure, and he's agreed. "And the shields held," the Admiral said, not quite a question. "The shields held," Reyes confirmed. 98.9% integrity at the end of the engagement. Marcus tells me that's within margin of error for instrument drift. We took the combined firepower of 50 dreadnoughts for 26 minutes and the ship barely noticed. There was a silence on the line, and when the Admiral spoke again, her voice had steadied into something more formal, though the emotion underneath it hadn't gone anywhere. "Captain, on behalf of Sol Defense Command, and I suspect on behalf of every government and every person on this planet who spent the last 6 hours wondering if today was the day everything changed for the worse, thank you. You and your crew just rewrote what this system's relationship with the rest of the galaxy looks like." "We had a good ship, Admiral," Reyes said, "and a crew who trained for 9 years for a day they hoped would never come. I'd rather thank them than take the credit myself." "Duly noted, pass it along, Sol Defense Command out." The channel closed, and Diana Reyes sat back in her command chair, watching through the viewport as the last of the Threxian dreadnoughts, weapons cold and engines dark, drifted into formation behind the modest fleet of human tow vessels that would escort them to the edge of the system and release them to limp home under their own power. Marcus Cole stood from his station, stretched, and looked at the tactical display one last time before it cleared. 50 for 50, he said. 0 for 0. I'm going to be honest, Captain. I ran that scenario 11 times in Sim, and every single time some part of me figured reality would find a way to make it messier. "Reality had one job today," Reyes said. "And honestly, so did we. I think we're allowed a good day every now and then." She looked around at her bridge crew, Osai still monitoring the shield telemetry out of habit even though the fight was long over, Cole running his hands through his hair with the particular exhaustion of adrenaline finally draining out of a body. The dozen other officers who had spent the better part of an hour executing a battle plan 9 years in the making without a single hitch. "Good work, everyone, all of you, let's bring her home." 6 months later, the story of the Threxian Peacekeeping Armada's defeat had made its way through every layer of galactic diplomatic back. Channel the conquered possessed, and then inevitably through channels the conquered did not control at all. The loose, informal, endlessly gossiping network of independent trade captains, smuggler crews, and minor species diplomatic corps who had spent 3 centuries watching the Threxian conquered conquer whoever it liked, and had never once had reason to root for the little guy the way they suddenly, unanimously, gleefully did now. Fleet Marshal Korveth Dral gave his report to the Conquered Council in full, exactly as promised, describing in careful, honest detail a species that had built a weapon the Conquered's finest physicists could not yet explain, wielded by a captain who had shown more restraint in victory than most conquering fleets showed in defeat. The Council did not entirely believe him at first. Then they sent a quiet reconnaissance probe to verify, and the probe returned with sensor data that confirmed every word. And confidence in a very different direction began to spread through conquered space. Not the confidence of conquerors anymore, but the wary, careful confidence of a civilization recalculating exactly where it stood in a galaxy it had, until recently, believed it understood completely. On Earth, the Ozymandias returned to a quiet, informal reception. No massive parade, no grand ceremony, because Diana Reyes had specifically requested that her crew be allowed to see their families before the world turned their names into headlines. And Sol Defense Command, for once, had agreed without argument. But word spread anyway, the way it always does, and within weeks the story had traveled to every corner of human civilization and beyond it. 50 dreadnoughts, 1 ship, 0 casualties, and a captain who had ended humanity's first contact with a conquering alien empire not by proving how much destruction humans could deliver, but by proving they didn't need to. It became, in time, the story that every other spacefaring species in the region would eventually hear in one version or another, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes understated, but never actually wrong in its essential shape. The galaxy had looked at a small, quiet, unassuming solar system on the edge of known space, decided it understood exactly what it was looking at, and sent 50 ships to collect what they assumed would be an easy prize. What they found instead was a species that had spent its entire violent, complicated history preparing, quietly, patiently, without fanfare, for precisely this moment. And when the moment came, humanity did not flinch, did not panic, and did not need to destroy anyone to make its point. The galaxy had underestimated humanity exactly once. It would not make that particular mistake again. And in bars and trade stations and diplomatic lounges from one end of known space to the other, in 100 different languages spoken by a dozen different species who had never once had reason to think kindly of the small blue world at the edge of the Sol system, a new understanding took root, simple and absolute and impossible to unlearn. Whatever you thought you knew about humans, whatever assumptions you walked in with, you were almost certainly wrong. And the smartest thing any species in the galaxy could do from this day forward was find out exactly how wrong before doing anything about it. Aboard the Voice of Inevitability, in the last hour before the crippled Armada crossed the heliopause boundary on its long, humiliating tow home, Ensign Isaac Vor found himself standing beside his marshal at the viewport, watching the blue-white marble of Earth shrink behind them into just another point of light among countless others. "Marshal," he said carefully, "may I ask you something I would not have dared ask this morning?" "Oh, you may. Do you regret it coming here?" Korveth Dral was quiet for a long time before he answered, and when he did, his voice carried none of the gravel-grinding menace it had carried in the broadcast that had opened this whole disastrous day, only something tired and honest, and for the first time in Vor's 6 years of service under him, genuinely reflective. "I regret the assumption more than the arrival, Ensign. We were not wrong to come here cautious of an unknown species. We were wrong to arrive already certain of the outcome. 300 years of victories taught me that certainty was a luxury I'd earned. Today taught me it was never a luxury at all. It was simply a habit nobody had yet made me break." He looked out at the stars, at the small, unassuming yellow sun receding behind them, and added, quieter still, "I imagine there will be officers in the council chamber who call this the day the conquered lost its way. I think in time they will be proven wrong. I think this will be remembered as the day we were finally forced to learn something true instead of merely something convenient. There is a difference, and I did not understand it until a human captain took the trouble to teach it to me without killing a single member of my crew to do so. Will you tell them that, Marshal, when we returns?" "I will tell them exactly that," Korveth Dral said, "word for word, however little they wish to hear it." Back aboard the Ozymandias, in the quiet hours after the engagement's formal conclusion, Diana Reyes found a few minutes alone on the observation deck, watching the same stars from the opposite vantage, and allowed herself, finally, The particular exhaustion that comes only after the adrenaline of history-making has fully drained out of a body. Marcus Cole found her there an hour later, 2 cups of coffee in hand, and sat down beside her without a word. Because 9 years of serving together had taught him exactly when his captain wanted company, and exactly when she wanted silence, and tonight it turned out she wanted both. "You did good today, Marcus," she said eventually, taking the coffee. "We did good today," he corrected. "Whole crew, 9 years of drilling for a fight we all secretly hoped would never come, and when it finally did, nobody so much as flinched." He took a sip of his own coffee, grimaced at the temperature, and looked out at the stars. "You think the Marshal meant it, what he said at the end there about telling the truth back home?" "I think he meant it in the moment," Reyes said. "Whether it survives contact with 3 centuries of institutional pride once he's standing in front of his own council, that's a different question. But I'll tell you what I do believe, Marcus. I believe every single sailor on those 50 ships is going to go home and tell their own version of today, whether their marshal's official report says it plainly or not, and you cannot untell a story like that. Not once 50 crews have lived it firsthand." She looked over at him. "That's the part I was counting on, honestly, more than anything Korveth Dral says to his council. We didn't just disable a fleet today. We handed 4,500 witnesses a story they're never going to stop telling, and every single one of those tellings makes the next fleet a little more cautious, a little less certain, a little more likely to check the size of the pond before they jump in." Cole considered that, nodded slowly, and let the silence stretch comfortably between them for a while before he spoke again. "You think this is it, then? Think the galaxy's done testing us?" "No," Reyes said, with the plain, unromantic honesty of someone who had spent 9 years preparing for exactly this kind of day and had no illusions left about how permanently any single victory settled anything. "I think somewhere out past whatever borders the Threxian conquered marks on its star charts, there are a dozen other species who are going to hear this story in the next few months and draw a dozen different conclusions from it. Some of them will be cautious. A few of them honestly might decide we're worth testing again just to see if today was a fluke. That's the nature of a big, complicated, mostly indifferent galaxy. Marcus, it doesn't learn its lessons all at once, and it definitely doesn't learn them from second-hand reports it didn't personally verify." She finished her coffee, looked out at the stars one more time, steady and unblinking and entirely unbothered by the vastness in front of her. "But I think today bought us something we didn't have yesterday, which is a reputation. And reputations, in my experience, are worth quite a lot more than any single fleet, however big. Today, the galaxy found out what happens when it underestimates us. Tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day after that for a good long while, I think it's going to remember." The story of that day traveled far beyond the borders of the Threxian conquered in the months that followed, carried by trade captains and diplomatic corps and the endlessly gossiping networks of a dozen minor species who had never once had reason to root for anyone smaller than themselves, and suddenly, unanimously, gleefully did. It became, in time, the story every other spacefaring civilization within 100 light-years would eventually hear in one form or another. 50 dreadnoughts, 1 ship, 0 casualties, and a captain who had proven her species' strength not by the scale of the devastation she was willing to deliver, but by how completely she hadn't needed to deliver any at all. The Conquered never sent another peacekeeping armada to Sol space again. Nobody did. They didn't need to be told twice.